Welcome and welcome back, everyone, to the Learn with Kubi podcast. I'm really so excited for today's conversation because we have with us a powerhouse guest as usual, and she's going to give us so much insight that I think is going to be so helpful for creators who are trying to get into this space. I'm storming the weather, y'all, so bear with me. But before we get into the questions and the bio, thank you, Gianna, for being on the episode today.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to read off Gianna's bio as I usually do with all my guests, and then we're going to get right into the questions. Gianna Griffith is a client operational specialist with 5 years of experience across digital marketing, social media, and cross functional campaign execution. She's worked with both independently and within agency environments, supporting influencer partnerships as part of larger integrated marketing strategies and helping campaigns move from idea to execution. Gianna brings a strong operational lens to the creator economy, offering insight into how brands actually evaluate collaborations, manage budgets, and build long-term partnerships. Outside of work, she's a big fan of alternative R&B, psychological thrillers, and winding down with a good book and occasionally a glass of wine. She's passionate about clarity, communication, and making the business side of marketing feel less mysterious and more accessible. Amazing. I'm so excited to have you here, Gianna. Thank you again for being on the podcast. I know it's going to be a great conversation. So, today's episode is really going to be focused around how brands evaluate and select creators. And we're really going to talk about how creators can position themselves for longer term partnerships rather than one off deals. So, I'm so excited. Let's get right into the questions.
All
So the
right.
first question that we have here is, what are some of the reasons brands turn away creators even when they have the follower count and audience fit?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think for me, I want to like reframe the question a little bit because it's not as like personal of a decision as it feels like on the creator side of things. Like you're putting your best foot forward, you're doing all the right things, and even still, it may not be the right fit for that particular campaign. So to answer that question, I'll like give a little bit of insight into like what the selection process actually looks like. So there's like several different platforms similar to like a LinkedIn slash like the LinkedIn jobs section for filtering through all the different potential creators that a brand could work with, especially for like the larger the company, the more likely they are to use a tool like that to filter through. So again, it's very impersonal, that like beginning stage.
Mhm.
So we filter through, see the people that make sense, and it's that stage of it is metrics based. Like, okay, we have 20 slots for a campaign, sort of like roughly based on our budget. So we need, five in this section, five in this section, and so on.
Mhm.
And that's really what it looks like at the outset. Once we have like a general idea of who could make sense, then that's when teams like the agency that I work with currently, other influencer agencies, or even like the internal marketing teams at a company will do a little bit more research to see like, oh, what's their content like? Like, yeah, they have 100,000 followers, but like, what's the kind of style of video that they do? That's where it comes in to be a little bit more focused on the actual creator themselves, because then we're evaluating, okay, if we ask for X, Y, and Z deliverable, can they deliver that?
Mhm.
Um, so I say all of that to say that a lot of times what makes you a good fit is often like the most distilled version of how you would show up in those different searches. You know, um, your like your name, your numbers, and your category, which I'm sure we'll like get into with some of the later questions. But that like category piece of it is often what's most important because brands are looking for people that match with the industry that they're in. So I would say like those are the main things. And if you're not a good fit, that could be for a number of reasons. But usually it's because they either don't have the budget to capture everybody in that particular category, and or your content may not be a fit for exactly what they're looking for at that time for that campaign.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really insightful because, like you mentioned, it can feel personal when a creator has all the right boxes checked off and they still don't get into the opportunities that they're hoping for. So, this
Yeah.
gives a little bit more insight into kind of the systemic approach of what brands are doing to filter through a lot of creators, right? And you mentioned a bit before we get into the next question, you mentioned a bit about the software, right? Which is what I talk a lot about on my page as well. Is brands are using tools; they're not necessarily manually going through Instagram or YouTube. They're filtering with these softwares to help them find a lot of creators very quickly. So,
Mhm.
what would you say is the most important piece that creators should know about these tools to help them stand out more when it comes to being found on the platform?
Yeah, I think part of it is also understanding how those tools function and if there's anything on your end that you can do to like show up with a more accurate representation of like who you are and what you do. Um, Sometimes it's not that simple. Again, these are all fallible systems, so even with all the right, again, checking all the right boxes, it may not filter through. Um, but I would say, yeah, making sure that like if it's a platform that allows you to have like keywords or like attach certain phrases or categories or whatever to your like profile within it, that could be one way. um and yeah, I feel like that's really the only main way, especially with again how like technical the platforms often are. There's not like you can like, send a cover letter or something like that, or like make a video specific to a company necessarily that they'd like see. But usually those keywords like do the trick enough so that you'll filter into the right sections when people are searching, and then we can kind of take it from there. And I will say, like, honestly, the people that are working at these agencies are as chronically online as we all are. So we don't necessarily have to do the all the like manual research, but oftentimes that's part of the process for us anyway to verify what the platforms are telling us. It's like, all right, it looks like they might be a good fit. Let me cross check that with like how I experience their content before. Again, it's a very like systematic process. So let's say I'm an influencer marketing manager at a company, I do that search, then cross check it, then I bring it to my team to either get approval or just like general confirmation to move forward with the next step. So it kind of helps to like have a balance of both, to be like perceived in a certain way on your profile and also have the like keywords and all that stuff in those different platforms.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And yeah, it's like you mentioned, it's fallible, right? So even with all the things checked off, you could still not show up. So it's really a matter of just making sure you have it at minimum checked off so that you have the best opportunity to show up in these systems.
For sure.
And I did want to clarify for anyone listening or watching, when you are applying to these platforms, you have platforms that have influencer marketplaces, right? Creator marketplaces where you can apply as a creator to be discoverable by brands. And then you have some software tools that are only for brands. And so the ones where you can apply as a creator, make sure that you're utilizing those so that you're showing up in these databases that brands are using. But some brands use a combination of both. And so um, when the brand has a software that they're only using, make sure that on the other side of that, your profile is optimized to show up in those platforms. So, two different ways, just to clarify for creators.
Yeah.
Now, the second question here is what should creators understand about how brands evaluate their content?
Yeah. I think I've touched on this a little bit, but it is very much like when looking at potential creators to work with, it's oftentimes like a tiered approach. So I think sometimes it can come across as like it's only the people with 3 million followers that are getting these campaigns. And that's not necessarily true. I mean, especially with the agency that I work with, I've seen people with 10,000 followers have like long-term relationships with companies because they really value the content that they create. So to answer the main question, I think it's important to understand the value that you're able to bring. and making sure that you're a subject matter expert on like whatever niche you're in. um, Making sure that that comes across clearly, that you're able to like clearly communicate your opinions on certain things. If you're more of like a, say you're in a very like specific industry, um, and maybe tech is your thing, make sure that you're able to clearly communicate, the specifics of different products, the ins and outs of how to use different softwares and platforms, like all that kind of stuff. Like make sure that that's the way that you're coming across, because then brands will be able to see that your audience not only trusts your opinion, but you're educated enough to take a creative brief that we give you, clearly communicate the product points in a way that is, both clear and creative, and share that with your audience in a way that they understand. So I think that's the main thing of like, I would say the like main 3 points. Obviously, like having good quality content, that I feel like that kind of goes without saying. But good quality content, being a subject matter expert on whatever your niche is, and then also just like being a good communicator, like on the uh, just like overall communication side of things, of like when someone emails you, you have a pretty quick response back. Like those, I've seen partnerships come together in a matter of days. So there has to be that like quick back and forth with, numbers, dates, like when deliverables can come in pretty quickly. So that is also an important piece of it too. But that's kind of how we like evaluate partnerships in general, but especially like content wise, making sure that your quality is there, and then your expertise is showcased.
Okay. I like that. I think it's interesting because subject matter experts are often reserved for folks who have quote unquote professional titles, right? And I think a lot of content creators don't think of themselves as that. But it's helpful to have that mindset because you do have to be a subject matter expert in your space, in your field of work, so that when you're presenting your value and your content, the brand that is on the receiving end can know, okay, like you said, when we give her this brief or we give them this brief, they can take that information and really make it as valuable as possible. And I think it also expands to knowing who your audience is as well, right? Knowing what they respond to, knowing when to post the content, knowing how to position it within the broader context of all your other content. I think that could be a mistake that some creators make, is posting in silo, right? When you get a brand partnership, it kind of is like an all ball out with everything else, but how to integrate it into your strategy is really what helps. And so to that note, um, how important is it to have that creator identity, right? To know who you are within the broader industry or within the broader category that your content belongs to.
Yeah, I think it's really important. And one other point I wanted to add to like the subject matter expert point, that can be as simple as like not like, I know I use tech as an example, but even like beauty content creators. Being a subject matter expert doesn't mean that you're like a licensed cosmetologist or a professional esthetician. It means that you're able to provide, like, even if it's anecdotal evidence, like, this is my experience with this product. I tried it over the course of 3 months. This is how it worked for me. And I'm sharing this information with you. Like, that's really all it is. But being like clear about that, and coming at it from a like educational point of view, I guess, is the main way that you can like position yourself to be more of an authority in whatever category. um but to answer your question, why it's important to like position yourself a certain way, um is kind of back to the point at the beginning of like, if we're going through a database and we're like, okay, we need somebody to talk about this, then we
Mhm.
want you to be able to come up, so that we can find you. And it doesn't have to be. I think that like whole like niching down conversation can make people feel really confined and just like stressed about picking like just one thing. Like there are so many creators that they do beauty content. They also talk about the technology that they use to create their content. So then that puts them in a tech space. They also talk about the systems that they use to stay organized. So that could also put them in like a software as a service space. There's so many ways to do it. I think you have to kind of you might have to get a little creative with how you sell certain things, but at the end of the day, like think about it, think about all the different things that you're interested in. Say there's like 5 different things you're interested in. It doesn't mean you have to choose one. It means that you have to have content available to provide for those categories. And like you were talking about, like integrating brand partnerships into your strategy, you also have to have a strategy that captures all of those things. If you truly are passionate about, a number of things, work that in so that it feels natural, so that when you do get partnerships that are maybe like slightly out of the category that most people know you for, it makes sense because, oh yeah, she talked about this, tool months ago, and now she has a partnership that's related to that, and so it all comes together and feels like a seamless transition.
Yeah, absolutely. That through line is really what I think it matters, right? Especially if you find it hard to niche down. Just being able to incorporate everything in a way that feels seamless is so powerful. Um, Looking at my questions here, because I really want to make sure I'm touching on what creators want to hear about the most. What is what is positioning as it pertains to content creation? I know you touched a bit on that piece in your previous answer.
Yeah, I think positioning sounds more strategic than it actually is. It's really just like uh, creating content around subjects that you find passion in or interest in, and focusing on those. Like I feel like it can be like that can be the like general explanation. Positioning when it comes to like branding is like you're like crafting a narrative that tells the story of who you are and what you do from the creator side of things, which like is a very high level explanation of that. But within it is all that we just talked about. What are the categories that your content is focused on? Who do you represent just like in and of yourself? All of those things kind of come into like how you're positioned in like the larger social media landscape. But if you just think about it simply, like if you're just wanting to like reflect a little bit on how you would be positioned, who are you? What kind of content do you create? And then you can like get more specific from there.
Yeah. And what do you think are some helpful ways that creators can start to position themselves practically?
Yeah, I think the most practical way to do that is what are things in your daily life that you just are inherently passionate about and interested in? If there's like sometimes you become a creator by like happenstance, sometimes there is like a more actionable strategy going on there. But if you just genuinely love to create content and you're not quite sure how to position yourself, that feels like too lofty of a term. Just think about, okay, if I never got like if I never had to, create a brief or send in a pitch at baseline, what would I like to be making content about? And that can be a million things, it can be two things, but just like asking yourself some of those questions. And I think for some people it can be helpful to think of it from a brand point of view. From other people, that more personal side of things can be helpful. Either way that goes, but the questions remain the same of like what categories are you creating in, and there are there's like so many ways that that can go. But I think where I see people having the most success is that they were already interested in these things, regardless of if they got to a million followers. But it took them that much further because they didn't have to force themselves to create this content. So I think really just recognizing what you're inherently passionate about, and taking it from there.
Yeah, that's great advice. That's really great because, you know, forcing it is what creates the burnout, right? You're trying to carry this persona that you don't actually fully enjoy within. So I think centering yourself is definitely key. Um, Now let's pivot a little bit and talk about the long term piece of it. So the creator lands the deal goes well. How do they turn that into a long term partnership? What are some of the um, tactics that they can implement to build themselves up for that longevity?
Yeah, that's a good question. It that can be kind of tricky. Also, like, it can be tricky mostly because brands are very particular about what information they do and do not share. Like, oftentimes when you're working with a brand on a campaign, it's like specific to that one campaign. You're working with their influencer team or an external agency that's partnered with them. You have those communications for, however many weeks, months, whatever. The campaign comes to a close, you turn in your metrics, and that's it. But I will say that within those conversations, it's really important to be like, responsiveness is one thing, but also, like, have a little bit of a rapport to whoever you're communicating with. Be make it known that, hey, if a campaign comes up, in 2 weeks, in 2 months, in 2 years, you can reach me at the same email, and I would love to work with you again. Um, and we, on the brand side of things, remember that and like make note of it and say, it was really great working with so and so. We should like use them again. And does it always come together like as seamlessly as that? Not necessarily, but we definitely make note of like the great relationships that we've had with people, the content that they create, and like how easy it is to work with them. And so I think those are just like some things to be aware of. Um, if there's like, so the other aspect of this too is that depending on the brand, there may be other opportunities to be involved with them. Like maybe they have like a brand ambassador type situation that you can apply to, and that keeps you connected to maybe it's their community manager or whoever it is on the team that keeps you connected to them, and you're able to like foster that relationship for a more long-term partnership down the road, in case they're not doing a lot of campaigns. So that's like one other way, but I would say like the easiest way, honestly, is just to do your best to make a great first impression. Maybe like follow up in a couple of months if you haven't heard anything, just to like keep your name top of mind. Um, and yeah, just continue to like be a good, clear communicator. And ideally they would make note of that. I wish there was like a step-by-step guide of like how to make sure that that's like a definite, but there's no way to guarantee it. But I will say like the way that you show up in those settings is often what makes the lasting impact.
Absolutely, yeah. First impressions matter for sure, and I think that's why there's so much emphasis put on the delivery aspects of the partnership, because it's how you show them your talent, it's how you show them your professionalism and your reliability as well. So, like you said, if the everything goes well, they come back and they work with you again. To that piece, how often do you see creators? I'm not too sure um, the type of role you play within the brand deal process. So maybe you can touch on that a little bit. But how often do you see creators pitching packages where they have a retainer embedded into the package?
Yeah, so on my side of things, often what those conversations look like is kind of like what you said. We're asking for information from them to like craft how we're going to like allocate the budget. I'm not necessarily the one making those decisions, but I do see a lot of those communications back and forth, which is why I can speak from experience. Like, however prepared you are with, these are the numbers, like this is kind of my like firm rate for these deliverables. um Sometimes a retainer just like truly isn't an option for us as an agency or even for companies in general, depending on what kind of campaign it is. Sometimes they're just one-off campaigns and like that's the only flexibility that we have. If it's more of a open-ended conversation, that's when that retainer comes in. And sometimes the retainer, so to speak, can be usage. Sometimes that's how you're able to secure that bit more consistency in the like income that you're receiving from those partnerships. So like that's one thing, kind of a separate conversation. But
I think
um
we should go into that.
yeah, I mean, but I think to kind of answer the question as best I can, being as prepared, like I feel like the moment that you're even a little bit interested in partnerships, think about what numbers you would present if somebody, like, say you got an email tomorrow and they were like, hey, we'd love to work with you. Can you send an email back in the next couple hours with what numbers, like what numbers apply to which deliverables and so on and so forth? Like, put a media deck together, even if it's just like, something in Canva that like you're just spitballing, just like have something. Because that's what we're basing these decisions off of. Like we start, there's usually a member of the team that sends a quick email to say like, hey, we're interested, like what, do you have a media deck that you can show us? We're like trying to get a gauge of, how many creators you can work with for this campaign, whatever. That's something along those lines. You send back your media deck, you say that it's, I don't know, $10,000 for 5 videos or something along those lines. We say, okay, so here's the budget, $10,000. This is like what we get. We do all the math, and then we take it a step further. But without that information, we can't really factor you in. If we're like those initial stages, we're trying to make the math make sense, and so without it, you can't be factored in. So I think having a usage fee like from the beginning helps us say, okay, it's $10,000 plus $3,000 for every 30 days that we use these videos, plus whatever ad spend we're putting behind, like boosting these posts. Like those are all the numbers that we need. And if there's something specific that you want to include, let us know immediately so that we can do the math and factor that in. And yeah, like retainers, I haven't seen as often in my industry, again, because I said oftentimes they're like one-off campaigns. But either way it goes, be prepared with that information, like stand firm on whatever rate you're giving to them. And just be clear about all the specifics that you want included in the content that you're delivering with them, and kind of just like all the ingredients involved in your participation in the campaign.
Yeah, that's great advice. I think it really speaks to the preparedness, because brands aren't coming to you sometimes with a full picture of this is exactly how we're going to factor in this. Like if they're kind of doing like a Tetris, like trying to fit in everything.
Yes.
So, having your numbers prepared, I think, is great advice. Just come prepared and be ready to share that and stand firm in it, because sometimes we're not firm, right? We come to the negotiations, we're like trying to get the best thing that we can get without actually advocating for ourselves. And so, just to kind of touch on that before we get into um, the questions again, what do you think creators should know about the negotiation process in general?
Yeah, I would say, so I kind of have a two-part answer for
Okay.
this. So there's a level of what's the word? There are companies at a certain stage, we'll say, that there will be no negotiation. Like you don't need to negotiate. If you say it's $10,000, they'll say, "Okay, cool. Like we need the deliverables by April 1st, and we'll send you a brief on Tuesday." Like that, like that's it. We just need to know what your number is so that we can, like I said, we can do the math, make sure it makes sense, and
Oops.
those are the only
Excuse me.
those are the only questions that we have. There's, especially with like the companies that I've worked with, and I will say, like, I'm on the B2B side of things, which is often like tech or software or even like healthcare, like industries that you wouldn't necessarily associate with influencer marketing are actually more interested in it than you might think.
Mhm.
But with that said, a company would not initiate a campaign if they weren't prepared with a large enough number to like capture the group of influencers that they're reaching out to. Like we're not going to email you and ask if we don't have at least some idea that like we can pay you that amount. um so I would say just like the oftentimes where you'll find negotiation, so to speak, is like in the deliverables process. Like, say we already have 25 videos that we're getting. Maybe we want a LinkedIn post instead. Maybe we want an Instagram post instead that's like a static post. Maybe we want stories instead. Like that's usually where it gets to be more of a collaborative conversation. But it's rarely like, well, we can only give you like $500. Like if someone's saying that to you, then they're probably not prepared to have a true partnership with you. I find that those conversations are where it gets a little sketchy because, a company that is in a position to partner with you even for a one-off campaign or for a long-term partnership is prepared to provide you with whatever rate you feel is appropriate for the work that you're putting in. Um, but that conversation aside, if there is a limit to their budget, and maybe, so here's a better example of like negotiation. Maybe you have a media deck that you shared with them that had a certain number, and then in the conversation, like in reading through the agreement, you realize that you forgot to put in your usage fees. That's when it might be more of a negotiation, quote unquote, to say for them to be like, oh, we already confirmed the budget with our team. I don't like, it might take 3 more weeks for us to get approval for this additional usage fee. Is there any way that we can maybe change the deliverables that you're giving us or whatever the case is so that the rate that we've already agreed on makes sense for you? That could be the conversation. But I would say very rarely is a brand that you like want to work with going to try to shortchange you. Like you don't want to work with a brand like that, in my opinion,
Yeah.
because they shouldn't be trying to like skirt around paying you what is appropriate. And again, and I say that with the understanding that a creator is also providing a rate that makes sense for where they're at currently, and is like aligned with their engagement rates and all that stuff. Like when you're making the deck, you're doing all that information and like calculating what rates would be appropriate, blah blah blah. And so then when you present it, we should see it and it makes sense, and we just say, okay, cool, like let's get going. um, if there's a question about that, it's usually not a good sign, in my opinion.
Mhm. Yeah, no, absolutely. And it is unfortunate when creators encounter brands that do try to lowball them. I think in the industry, there is a bit of, you know, sometimes exploitation that happens because creators don't know their worth as
Yeah.
far as not only the value they bring through the content creation process, but the usage, the licensing, right? So if you have anything else that you'd like to share with the watchers, the listeners about the negotiation, please, I'd love to hear from you before we get into this last question.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think, like I said, I think in all of this, just making sure that you're prepared for those conversations. And like, it can feel really awkward to talk about money. It can be like a really uncomfortable topic. Um, and so I understand that completely. I understand, like, it makes complete sense to me. But you should also have the confidence, one, to like say no if something feels weird to you in those communications, um and two, to present yourself as a professional and advocate for yourself. Or even like I've seen people, which I'm not recommending that anybody do this, but if you can, sure, like sometimes people will have like their best friend like be cc'd on those emails so that they have like a little bit of backup, you know. If something feels off, maybe you need like fresh eyes on an agreement or something like that, and maybe you're not in a position to have a manager quite yet, have somebody else that maybe they are not, you know, legal counsel, but they can give you some advice for whether or not an agreement makes sense if you're feeling nervous about it.
Mhm.
um so like that's one thing, but I would say just in general, like try to do as much research as you can. I've been really like happy to see that a lot more creators are being transparent about, you know, what they're making for certain deals and like kind of what the like money side of things look like, because I feel like that's very, it can be perceived as really taboo. I don't really think it should be. Again, these like companies make millions, billions of dollars a year. Like sharing what you made for a partnership shouldn't make you feel insecure. If anything, you're just trying to be transparent about, yeah, those logistics. But yeah, I would say just again, do your research, be prepared, be confident in your answers. And I think just try not to give too much room for there to be any like exploitation or like um you know, anything out of the norm. Like these email exchanges should be like, you know, friendly but professional, and like, you know, if there's a question, answer the question, make a decision, and then it should be like a pretty simple process. Ideally there's never a scenario where it like goes any further than that. But I think just being as prepared as you can be, um, can just like help things go a little bit smoother.
Absolutely, that's all great advice. I definitely love that. Um, I think just to add on to what you're saying, for creators who are pitching or receiving deals from companies, the company size does play a huge role, right, in how they structure that negotiation. So I think what you're speaking to is more of the bigger companies, maybe in the B2B space. So, just keep that in mind, as a listener, to really pay attention to like the company that you're in negotiations and talks with, because smaller businesses oftentimes are not going to have that huge of a budget. So you want to tailor or meet them where they're at, or maybe just skip over that opportunity altogether if it doesn't align with your base floor rate, which is something we get into in a different discussion. Um,
Totally. Oh, sorry. One other thing I wanted to add, which because that's a great point. Um, Part of that preparedness is like doing your research too, and also like, and on the pitching side of things, you can kind of get a sense of, you know, company size. If they're like a small business, there's a lot of different ways to work with brands. Like to your point, I'm talking about like my experience with like a specific industry. But there's also, there can be like in-kind partnerships where like the, you know, you get product for creating content. But even in those communications, you should be just as like clear about what you're willing to provide in exchange for products, if that is the situation, as you would be if you were in a conversation with a large company that's like paying thousands of dollars. Like the tone of those conversations, the firmness of those conversations should not change because a business is smaller. Because to your point, yeah, they might not have, an influencer team that's like fielding all of these requests, but maybe the interaction with you helps them set a precedent for how they want to work with influencers in the future. So just saying like, hey, yeah, I'd love to do an in-kind partnership with you. Here's what that looks like for me. And then, the conversation can go from there. But you're like setting that expectation of here's the work I'm willing to provide in exchange for whatever the exchange looks like.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Keep the firmness regardless. I like that. That's really good piece of advice. So the next question that we have here is what separates, and I think you might have touched on this a bit, what separates a creator who gets long-term partnerships from one who just is constantly in the one-off partnership cycle?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one is interesting because it's usually not like intentional on the brand side of things to like sometimes the way that a company is structured, they they have campaigns come up for particular like product launches, or maybe there's like a new feature that's coming out or whatever it is. Um, but my point in that is they may only go so far to create a campaign for a specific event. Maybe there's not a full blown, like always on budget to just like constantly have like influencer content going. And so one off campaigns is what makes the most sense. But I will say, um, establishing that like rapport with whoever on the team you have a connection with often gets you included in the conversation. Maybe they want to explore having like an actual influencer program in the future. And because that like one-off campaign, they had a great experience with you, you're top of mind when they open up that conversation again. And sometimes I think even while it's like one-off campaigns can feel like uh, few and far between. Usually, that's just because of the way that the business functions. But again, sometimes their experience with you puts you in conversations for campaigns in the future, and maybe that relationship with the brand establishes more of a partnership, even if technically on the back end they're one-off campaigns based on different products. You are almost like positioned as an influencer that's like associated with this company in a more long-term way because of those different campaigns. Because like the perception of it is like, oh, there was a paid partnership in March and in September and in, you know, I don't know, June of last year. Like your association to companies, even if they're one-off campaigns, do kind of help how you're perceived by other companies in that category or just by like brands in general, because of that connection.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's the strategy, right? The knowing what partnerships are going to give you leverage versus the ones that are going to just kind of be a source of income, right? So I
Yeah.
think that that's definitely important to know. So as we wrap up here, I'd love to hear from you. What are some things that creators should just know about the entire brand deal process? Like how do they better prepare themselves to, get brand deals and to be strong brand partners?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think again, like I said, doing your research, being prepared, also doing like that doing your research sounds kind of vague, but when I say that, I mean not only like in the creator space of things, of like, having your rates ready, that kind of stuff, but also doing research on, maybe you're not necessarily pitching to these brands, but maybe you have an ideal list of brands that you want to work with, knowing what, like, some specifics about them, understanding the way that the company functions, and like having some like talking points if you do decide to pitch them, that you can speak to, that shows that you, maybe on paper you're in a different category, but you've done your research, you understand how your content could fit into their strategy, and you're able to kind of advocate for yourself in that way. Sometimes partnerships can come about in like a roundabout way, and if you're able to show your stuff, they're like, oh, actually, we're gonna go with this one instead of this one. So I think being prepared in all aspects is helpful, and if you're able to come up with like an ideal list of brands, that's always helpful too. And also, like I mentioned before, understanding where your content fits in, like knowing what categories make sense for you, even, and maybe if that's like doing an audit of your content to see what things like kind of pop out to you, or tailoring your content more specifically, to kind of align yourself with certain brands. There, you can kind of go about it either or both ways. But I think that's kind of the main thing: understanding your positioning, being prepared both with numbers and with research on the different brands, and then, like I mentioned in another point, being like confident and firm in all of your communication. I think that really is impressive to the different teams that you'll be communicating with, because it also, like, it's impressive but also just helps us make decisions quicker, because we have a better understanding of you, the content you create, and also what you're asking for.
Yeah, absolutely. And as one final bonus question, what are some things that creators are doing wrong or not as effectively in this space that you think they should stop doing?
That's a good question. I mean, that's kind of tough.
Yeah.
I think, okay. I think that sometimes when you have a really specific perspective, um, it can be hard to put yourself in the mind of a brand, and understanding what these partnerships are asking of you is really important. Not like, no one's trying to like, water down your creativity or anything like that, but especially as someone who works on the agency side of things, we have an entire like technical team of people, usually, especially like I said on the B2B side of things. We're often in answering to like maybe a team of like product managers, or like a specific product team, and they need to get certain talking points across. Otherwise, this partnership doesn't feel effective to them. So, my point in that is understanding how to still create content that is true to you, that's in your tone of voice, that is coming from your unique perspective, while also addressing everything in the brief in a way that is like brand safe, which I like hate to use that term, but that is how we look at things.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, being able to know how to do that. And like I said, it doesn't have to be in like a completely like sanitized way. I don't that's They wouldn't want to work with you if they wanted something that like, they could create internally. Um, but knowing how to like interpret those creative briefs, and even if that means like asking some follow-up questions, maybe you send your script to be approved before filming, or like whatever that looks like. But understanding what brands are asking of you once you get to that stage, and even I think one like potential suggestion could be like doing that exercise yourself of like, okay, if so and so reached out to me, could I could I create content about this aspect of their business in a way that feels similar to partnerships that they've done before, and uh, making sure that like that feels clear enough to you so that if you're pitching it makes sense, if they come to you it makes sense, and there's not like a lengthier process of trying to understand the creative that they're looking for while you're in the midst of a partnership.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, that's really the gist of it, right? Just knowing how to pinpoint the different areas of the process and position yourself as the solution during that stage. So I appreciate that advice. And I know those who are listening and watching, you have a lot of notes that you're taking. The episode notes will be available as usual at the link in the description. Make sure you grab those so that you can have everything in a succinct place. We will catch you in the next episode. But for now, thank you so much for tuning in. Gianna, how can people connect with you?
You can connect with me on LinkedIn. My LinkedIn is just my full name, Gianna Griffith. And yeah, I would say that's the best way to reach me.
Amazing. And those of you know who are watching, you can connect with me at Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn, etc. Learn with Kubi. And I will catch you in the next episode. Thanks for listening. All right.